29. Krang land issues in the Bahamas. Krang lands in the Bahamas. I was once on a radio program on Radio ZNS, Bahamas, with Tex Turnquest, talking about Krang lands in the Bahamas. A caller wanted to know why most of the lands in the Bahamas were not private lands. Tex answered that all the lands in the Bahamas were originally Krang lands. That would pass as a short answer to the history of land in the Bahamas, but the story is much more complex than that. The land system that we see today in the Bahamas is the legacy of a system of settlement and exploitation, which brought together land and slave labor in the pursuit of economic profits. This land-labor cycle has only been fully dismantled twice in the recent history of our region. The first was in the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1803, under the presidencies of Alexander Pétion, 1806 to 1818, and Jean-Pierre Boyer, 1818 to 1843. The second was in the Cuban Revolution, 1959, in which the revolutionary state appropriated all large privately owned estates and produced a state-controlled tenure system. In the Haitian case, a land-based peasantry owning and or occupying small parcels of land emerged by 1842. In startling contrast, the Dominican Republic, which shared most of this turbulent period of history with Haiti, became independent from Haiti in 1844 and actually witnessed a reversal of this trend with the reconcentration of land in the large sugar estates. Back in 2005, the Bahamian government was struggling to bring some uniformity to the land situation in the islands. This was to become an unending struggle. The Bahamas has over 700 islands and 2,000 rocks or keys, all spread over 100,000 square miles of ocean. Wealthy entrepreneurs continued to arrive in the Bahamas with their open wallets to purchase an island or a key for either their private residence or a hotel establishment. The trouble here was that some of these locations had people on them who did not themselves have any legal recognized claim to that physical space. The challenge of bringing structure and order to this complicated system of land administration was joined. I came into this picture at two junctions. The first was in respect to the allocation of Crown lands in the Bahamas. The second junction was as part of the team of consultants dealing with the wider issues of land administration. Where did Krang lands come from? Now, you would not be faulted in thinking that because these lands are referred to as Krang lands, the solution would be a simple case of dismantling the legacy of British colonialism in the Bahamas. Not true. The history of colonization of the Bahamas is interwoven with the history of the American Revolution. At the end of the American War of Independence, some loyalists moved with their slaves from states like New York into the islands of the Bahamas. Their intent was to develop their plantation system and replace the trade that England was losing through the secession of its North American colonies, with the exception of Canada. What they found in the Bahamas were islands with very little topsoil on which to grow crops like tobacco and cotton. Most of the soil was sandy shores. In In a typical plantation style of land use, the slaves were shuttled off to the periphery, while the planters maintained their hold of the little arable soil that existed. That emerged into a pattern of slave settlements on the sandy shores of islands such as Eleuthera and Exuma. Then this happened. The planters soon found out that the plantation system was not as promising an enterprise as they had hoped, and in stark reverse to what had occurred in other plantations, the planters were the ones to sneak off of the plantation, leaving the slaves stranded and on their own. This was the legacy until the era of hotel resort construction, when the land market reversed itself and began placing a higher value on beachfront property. But these were exactly the lots of land that descendants of free slaves were claiming as their inheritance. My consultancy was expected to develop the basis for a consistent Krang land policy in the Bahamas. The study was expected to provide technical, legal, institutional, and economic recommendations that would form the basis for developing a national Krang land policy. This task required a residency in Nassau for about 2 months. Within these 2 months, I would conduct 3 town hall meetings in Long Island, in Abaco, and in Andros Island, in order to listen to the demands and expectations of those citizens with respect to the future disposition of Krang lands. The most common complaints was that people had been living in these places for years, applying for Krang lands, only to witness foreigners parachuting into the area and being given access before them. Most of the procedures of holding town hall meetings, interviewing officials, and reading documents were already familiar to me. However, traveling to the various islands in the Bahamas did give me a great opportunity to learn new things about the historical evolution of Caribbean culture building up from slavery. My reliable guide in the government was Mr. Tex Turnquest, who was then the Director of Planning in the Office of the Prime Minister. I have already mentioned my concern to be able to tell the client something they do not already know. I have seen many European consultants in the Caribbean come into our space seeking answers from the locals in the fields and then reporting back the same information as if they themselves had just discovered it. So, if in listening to this volume, you are still awaiting to find out something you did not already know, then you may as well quit at this point. You won't be missing much. The Bahamas was not a challenge to me. I totally enjoyed the opportunity to become conversant with the history of the place, its people, and the geographic space they occupy. There is an old African proverb that says, "The hands that tied the lion knows best how to untie him." The only problem in this case was to make sure that you were learning not from the lion, but from the hands that tied him. This translated into explaining to my Bahamian clients both the politics and the economics of land allocation as was being practiced in their system. Winners and losers in land distribution. Starting with the politics, given the fact that land resource itself is limited and immovable, users and uses may change, it is not surprising that many citizens tended to view this process of land allocation as one of selecting winners and losers. The difficulty arose once the state became part of that unwritten process of bringing Krang lands onto the private land market by commoditizing such land parcels. This is where the economics wins over the politics. Within the logic of economics, commoditization of Krang lands simply meant matching a willing buyer and a willing seller. When you submit an application for Krang land, you are putting yourself forward as a willing buyer. However, the state is more likely to act as a selective seller. The state had sound economic reasons for giving preference to those who can offer either a higher price or a larger acreage at the going price. It makes you feel that somewhere in this morass there is a conspiracy against the poor. Krang land allocation is not always used as a tool for creating strategic space. It sometimes appears to follow a preference for those who have the financial capacity to develop the land, rather than those who have either the social need or a simply human desire to occupy land. First legitimate response to these conflicting perceptions was to codify the content of the term good stewardship of Krang land. By this, I meant a Krang land allocation process following three procedural rules, namely land use and land protocols, categories of land use preferences, differentiated approval tracks. My second legitimate response was to share the stewardship of Krang land with communities and individuals organized as social actors. Here I wanted to shift Krang land policy from a pure resource allocation task to a client satisfaction approach. As such, I proposed strategies such as co-management approach, land designations, district resource mapping, differentiated application tracks, growth management strategies, concurrency management systems, and model bylaws. For those who by now have read some of my history, you would have noticed that my biases were beginning to show. I spoke of these recommendations just now as legitimate responses, not legal responses. This harkens back to my tension between legitimacy and legality, and my everlasting belief that once these measures are seen as legitimate by the masses of the people, the politicians will find a way to make them illegal. The Krang land policy exercise in the Bahamas was an expiring learning exercise, but it will soon be miniaturized within a year when I was called to participate in a larger project on land use and administration in the Bahamas.